Hello, everyone, and welcome to Pioneering Pensions. Today, we're trying something a little different and putting Stefan on the hot seat. My name's Gareth Gibbins, and I work for OMERS in Canada. Stefan, thanks for having me today.
It's a pleasure, and I'm looking forward to your difficult questions.
I'm looking forward to them as well. But before we get started, just a couple housekeeping points. For the first 30 minutes, we're going to keep Stefan on the hot seat, and Stefan will be asking you some questions. The next 30 minutes, we're opening up to you, the audience, so please use the chat and type in your questions, and we'll get to them during the second half of the show. Today, we will focus, Stefan, on your experience in the pension sector. And I know you have a lot to share with us based on your experience. Stefan has done both a lot of applied work and academic work. So Stefan, really looking forward to learning a lot over the next hour.
Thank you.
So Stefan, one of my favorite interview questions, typically in a job interview context, is how did you get into pensions? That's not usually something someone grows up saying they want to be in the pension field. Can you share some of your experience with us?
Yeah, it's like most in life, it's more a coincidence than anything else. I did my PhD in econometrics, which is a lot about modeling, arch and gauge model, very technical quantity stuff. And I started to work at a pension fund. And I thought that was quite intriguing work because it was not just the modeling. You have to put everything together, a lot of different aspects, everything from member communication to investments, and apply a lot of different skill I've learned over the years. So I find it very, very exciting from that perspective. And also, when you're going to work with something, if it has sort of a bigger meaning, pension is part of a social fabric. Everybody getting old, everybody going to think about how they're going to live when they're retired. And working on improving the how do you help people with a retirement is actually quite rewarding in itself.
And so Stefan, you mentioned quant and you mentioned more behavioral personal there. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you made that transition?
Yeah, typically say to people I'm a quant who turned behavioral. And the reason is when you learn a lot about models, the first thing you learn that a model is an approximation of reality. And models are never a perfect fit. And model has their weaknesses. And if you rely too much on them, you're going to end up in trouble. But what I realized is that when you study an organization, and I was in an organization that went through a big change as of my first job, you start to look at how people behave. How are decisions being made? And there you start to realize there's so much of the human dimension, behavioral dimension in the whole aspect. So the model is a good tool to help you, but don't rely too much on it. And understand the behavioral part of how we act, how we make decisions as a group is really where sort of it opened my eyes to understand the world a little bit better. And with this combination of seeing the strengths and the weaknesses of a model and understanding our behavior, how that affects our ability to make decisions, combined with that, I think I got a bit of better understanding of the world we're operating in.
Yeah, it's a complicated world for sure, especially in the pension space, as we all know. So you sort of alluded to some, I guess, improvements by bringing those two worlds together, those two different perspectives, and perhaps some of the sort of fallacy in there as well. Can you tell us a little more about that?
Well, what I experience as a big fallacy is that we tend to believe a lot in our models, and we think the model is a good description of reality, and we have regulators who start to regulate based on models. And someone said, I think it's Avery Lowry who said, a model is a good companion, a bad boss, and a terrible religion. Because if you let the model to dominate, you're going to have white spots. You're not going to look at the world as it really is. You're going to follow the model. And even if all the regulation is there to help you, if you tick the box and just regulate according to the model, you're going to end up in trouble. And we've done that as an industry year after year. All these financial crises that are so unlikely to happen according to the model that they probably never happen takes place every decade. Yeah. So there's something in there we need to be aware of. And also, when you look at sustainability, for example, which is a big thing going forward, that also becomes more tick a box, put more models, managing to the model. Yeah. And then you might actually miss the real world impact because you are following a model. And that, I think, is it's a difficult thing to go away from, because the model can act as a safety blanket. So Charlie Brown, you remember with Snoopy Dogg and Charlie Brown, he always has his blanket. Yeah, he goes with his safety blanket all the time. And I think for many, the model is a safety blanket. So it's time to grow up and let go of it.
Yeah. Just don't tell the Peanuts, and Charlie Brown about that one. So you talked about models, regulatory environment, some of the other factors in there as well. What about governance? What role does governance sort of at a pension plan sort of play in those different dynamics?
Yeah, governance is, for me, quite an intriguing topic. I've always kind of been into trying to understand organizational design and how do you make it as good as possible. I spent a lot of time debating this with Keith Umbachs here, back in the days when he was running ICPM. And I found this so intriguing because we kind of know what to do, but we're not doing it. And can we put in a governance to protect the savers from an organization? But my conclusion over the years is governance on paper is one thing. Culture is what drives an organization. So take, for example, Enron, which was kind of a big disaster, more or less. They had all the check and balances in place. They had the right committees. They had the right functions, but they had a bad culture. And culture eat governance for breakfast, right? Well, that's what's wrongly paraphrasing of Drucker. But anyhow, the challenge there
I'm getting hungry now, though.
Yeah. But the challenge with that one is we believe too much that a governance structure will keep you safe. No, you need to have the right culture. Only then it will work. And that means the more you put in where you have to sort of let people not be responsible but follow a process, the worse a governance will get, because you don't have to stand up for what you've done, good or bad. So I think making the people more central is important, and governance on paper, in the long run, it doesn't matter. It's the culture and the people that matter. So I think a lot of organizations have a tendency to sort of say, if I just get the structure right, the people won't matter. I would flip it around and says, it's the people that matters. And, if you get not the perfect structure, you're probably fine anyway, with the right people. With the wrong people, you're lost anyway.
So I want to pick up on something you said there, and perhaps sort of take it to a more micro level. So you've talked about starting with the people.
Yeah.
I know from some of our conversations, you've also talked about that in a more micro context, about starting with the people, not starting with the problem. So for everyone listening today, can you share your perspective with them on that as well?
Yeah. When we want to improve pensions, I think, how can we make it better? We should always ask the question, what is the problem we're trying to solve, and for whom? And Einstein said this, which I kind of like a lot. He said, if I have 1 hour to solve a problem, you should spend 55 minutes defining the problem and 5 minutes solving the problem. And I think if you think about what you're going to solve, it's so much easier to find a solution. The challenge we have, I think, as an industry is that we have a lot of solutions floating around, and they are looking for a problem. And that's not always the best way of solving someone's problem. So my suggestion is flip it around, try to understand the person in the center, who we actually working for, the member. What is their problem? How can we help them? And then the rest is more means to an end of solving that. So I think as an industry, we haven't been particularly great at thinking about what is the problem and how do we solve it and for whom. I think we went very, very quickly into solution mode.
Yeah. I think that probably resonates with a lot of folks, and I think thankfully we're starting to see sort of more of a customer-centric design perspective, if you will. And so we're just 10 minutes into the session today, but let's just say we just spent 50 minutes defining the problem. What is the solution?
Well, that's a good one. I think the member is not that interested in pension. They just want it to work. And sometimes, we need to do things for the member so they can easily get a solution without having to engage. But when we want to ask them questions and when we want to engage with them, I think it's really important to remember what was in the first version of the book Nudge by Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein. They basically said, any good choice architecture, you need to know, if I make this choice, what are the consequences in an understandable way? So when we're thinking about which choices should we give members who are interested, well, they should be choices we can quantify, that if you do this, these are the consequences. If it's choices where you have two alternatives and you don't really know what's going to happen if you pick either of them, it's more of a lottery, right? And here I think what's really important for members might not be if I'm going to have this provider of a global equity fund or another provider of a global equity fund. No, it's perhaps what happened if I take 3 years off to have a paternity leave or maternity leave. What happened if I want to work part-time 5 years from my planned retirement? What is the impact on my pension? So I think we need to start talking about what matters to the individual, which might not be what matters to us as an organization. I think that is a way to sort of starting identifying the problem. And once you know that, I think the rest is relatively simple. You need some investment stuff in there, you need some communication stuff. But if you built it from the product and from the choices the member are gonna get or what they can do, I think we can improve it quite a lot.
Yeah. I love that, and how really sort of putting the member, in the individual sort of front and center, at that conversation. Yeah. I think that's really, really great. And so you mentioned communications in their investments, as well. When it comes to the investments, obviously different types of, plan designs. How does that enter into the equation when we're sort of putting, the member, the plan participant, at the forefront of the conversation or consideration?
Well, it's quite different if you're a defined contribution scheme or if you're a defined benefit scheme. The scheme design in defined benefit, which is not available to many around the globe today, is basically you're gonna know what you get, and mainly the risk is for your employer and how your investment performs, if you're going to get it or not. If it doesn't work well, your investment side, the employer is going to fill the gap. So you know what you're going to get. So that's a very simple design. Most people are not able to get that design anymore because you're going to be in defined contribution, which means the employer just say, well, here's some money every month and it's going to go into a product, and good luck when you retire. So therefore, more rest on the product design or the scheme design in DC than in DB in terms of delivering what the member wants. And of course, you need to take investment risk. But when you're thinking about what problem I'm trying to solve, we typically think of this as an investment problem. And we typically want the member to think about it as an investment problem, because when we talk about choice, it's typically around investment choice. I say this now and then as a bit with tongue-in-cheek to challenge people to say, well, for a pension organization, isn't investments just a red herring? Something that distracts you because it's interesting. There's a lot of cool stuff going on in investments. In the UK now, it's a talk about investing more in liquids. Everybody, it's tangible, it's here and now, it's kind of funky. But the time and effort you put into that versus time and effort you can put in to other areas, is that wisely spent? And you could say, yes, investment is the most important driver, but if you do have a good strategic mix, or which is well diversified and somewhat balanced, you're probably going to deliver reasonable outcomes no matter what sort of the kind of investment activities you do. And here's a bit controversial to some extent, but I think it's really important to focus in what problem are we here to solve and what are the different tools. And I think of investments as a means to an end, not an end in itself. And therefore, when you design a product, you need to keep investment part of it in mind, but you're designing a product for the member that's going to work for the member. And therefore, for example, most members are not interested in making investment choices.
So this is probably a good point to go to one of my favorite parts of these series, usually being on the other side of the camera watching these, is to go to your previous guest with a question that they have for your new guest. But in this case, the guest is you.
Yeah.
So Stefan, we have a question for you from Lisa Bruggen from NetSpar. And rather than me reading out the question, we have a clip of Lisa's question. So please, let's roll the tape.
Given now the knowledge that we have about the challenges in activating people, but also the knowledge that we have about, okay, what are things that we can still do about this? The challenges that are in the organizations to really do this, it requires a culture change. And how do we manage? What is necessary to really bring that about?
Well, thank you, Lisa. You really hit the nail on the head with your questions, because what kind of culture do you need in order to actually make progress? And historically, pension has been an inside-out product. A lot of experts in different areas are talking, doing their thing in their own silo, and then it's sort of aggregated up, and then you have the end product. I think the culture there is pretty much, you do a really good expert job, you're a very good actuary, you're a very good investment professional, you do some communication, but it's a bottom-up approach. I would think that the best culture forward would be to start with a product, so sort of an outside-in perspective. What are we building? And then figuring out what do we need to deliver that? And then you have the different other units are more like there to provide a means to an end rather than an end in itself. This is a big change of mentality for many organizations, and I think it can be quite painful to implement it, because it's also going to change an organization's internal hierarchy. So groups that are very important in an expert-driven organization and inside out are going to be less important in an outside-in organization. And here I think there's a lot to learn from other industries who has gone through these changes. But if we can do that as a pension sector, I think that's how we can deliver better pensions. I also would say that I've seen in Netherlands, I've been here now for 18 years, I've seen a change going towards an outside-in. You can see more organizations thinking about this. How should we communicate to members? How are we going to make this better? And you also start to see some organizations are actually outsourcing their investment and implementation of the investment, not the strategic composition of the investments, which I think is an indication that you're moving towards thinking of a product where investment, for example, is more of a component in the offering where you have to design that to fit your offering. So there are positive movements. I think with the new law here in Netherlands, or the new pension contract, there's opportunity for improvements, and the time is right, but you need the support from the top of the organization to do that. It cannot happen bottom up. It has to be top down, and it's not going to be an easy process, but a cultural shift from an inside out to an outside-in organization, I think is the key here.
Okay. Yeah. So thank you for sharing your answer to Lisa's question. And so you've said top-down change needed, outside-in approach. Heard communications in there as well. So it sounds like we really need some innovation from the sector to tackle some of the challenges tomorrow. What do you see as that innovation, or where do you see that innovation coming from?
Yeah, I think the area which is going to be most interesting to watch is actually how do you meet the member? And when you come into a pension fund, if you're like, you have your job to do, you don't want to spend Saturday kind of reading up on pension and becoming an investment expert, gaining actuarial expertise. You want to watch Netflix or something else. So you pretty much want to have an easy interaction. Every hurdle that makes it difficult for you to interact is going to be like, oh, I'll do it tomorrow. Let's procrastinate. Because face it, when it's stuff you're not interested in, but you have to do, but you don't really want to do because it might be difficult, you tend to postpone it, right? So the best thing we can do to members is to make it very easy to interact with us, to find information in an easy way and make it very personal. So, for example, if I'm looking to you, Gareth, you want to say, you have saved this amount of money, you're going to retire at that age. I know a lot about you. And when that should be already in all the tools you have, all the information we know, you shouldn't have to do a lot of extra work as a member. And what is the information you're looking for? Can we give that information to you when you want it without you having to search through a very technical page? That is sort of where I see things going to be really challenged. I think a lot of this is there's fintechs all over the world who dream about solving this problem. They have good tools, technology, good ideas, etc., etc. But I never seen, very few fintechs have been able to go from a brilliant idea into a workable business model. How are you going to earn the money by providing this? So I think there's a room here for pension funds and pension organizations to actually do the development, because they sit on the book. They have the members. They have the instant feedback when you sort of release something new and can learn from it. But then you have to change your mind from being, as we said before, a very expert-driven company in different areas to almost like a consumer-facing organization saying, okay, if I do this change on my user experience, what are the consequences? And the user experience, what you want to offer them customers, what kind of choices you should guide your product design. The product design should guide how you invest the money. So if you do those steps, I think you can make quite a lot of progress with the stuff we got. And to be honest, when you think about the investment side, we know a lot about investment already, right? All the theory is roughly there. We know the world is complex, not complicated. We know that models are a bad predictor of the future, and we know they're going to be financial crises now and then. So that's about navigating uncertainty. But we have enough knowledge to do that in a good way if we have the right structure around it. But where we haven't done so much is on meeting the customer and making a product that works for the customer. What I typically say and think is like, as an industry, we have built solutions where we need to educate. I need to educate you, Gareth, because you don't really understand this. I need to transform you into Homo economicus. But you don't want to be that, right? Why don't we instead build a product that works for people who they are, not for who we want them to be? And if we can do that, we should sort of put this education idea to the side and build better user experiences. So I think when I see that, that is where the innovation is going to come from. And then that's going to guide what kind of product you're going to develop, or suite of products behind sort of the user experience, where you basically, I want this, or what kind of choices do you offer? And it sounds like obvious and novel, and it's like been done many other industries. But I think for the pension side, this would be a very cool road to go down.
Oh, very interesting. And there's a joke in there somewhere about my Saturday morning reading, but we'll leave that for another time. So Stefan, I know anyone who's had the chance to speak with you knows you're very passionate about pensions and helping to lead conversations and find ways to improve the sector for everyone. So we just talked about, innovation, and I think you may have covered some of these points already. But what about advice for those, in the sector, right? An individual's pension is just so important on many different levels, both the financial and the non-financial aspects of it. And I know I really value your advice in our conversation. So can you share, some of that with everyone? How can we help not just innovate, but improve the pension sector as well?
So if you are thinking about how can I be part of improving the pension sector, how can I make a better society? The first part is, I assume you're there because you want to improve the world. If you're there to make a great career and earn a lot of money, it's another set of advice for you, but I'm not going to tell them now. So the advice I would say, don't be afraid to ask the difficult questions. A lot of people are afraid of saying, I don't understand this, or why are we doing it that way? This doesn't seem to make sense. Ask the questions, but do it in a kind way, not kind of an aggressive way, because then people won't listen to you. That's a hard lesson to learn. The other one is, most mistakes have been done already. People have tried a lot of stuff, and some things work and some didn't. And it's very important to look at different countries. Because if you think you have a great idea, have it been tried somewhere else? How did it work? What was context? And you also have to keep in mind, United Kingdom is not United States. So what's working in the United States, you cannot just copy paste and put it straight into the UK, but you can see what can we learn from the product that worked in the US in that context. Canada is not Sweden. So what works in Canada might not work in Sweden, but we can learn a lot. And there's a lot of things people have tried and it didn't work. And you can also understand, okay, if it didn't work there and the context is roughly similar, it's probably not going to work here, so you don't have to try it. Then talk to people, because the only way you can share your ideas and test your ideas is by talking to other people. So the best thing you can do is tell your idea to other people, and don't be afraid, it's not going to be a super unique idea. Most people, you look at, you see, have people seeing something different, similar? Ask people to shoot at it, because it's better that, a colleague, Gareth, tells me my idea doesn't work because of that. And I say, oh, yeah, he has a point. It's much better than I'm go out and publicly fail, because, any input is good input. So be open with your thinking, talk to people, check other countries, and try to, talk with competitors, talk with other industries, because we're all in it to make a better product. And in reality, even if you have a great idea and you talk to someone from a competitor, the chance that they're going to be able to implement that very quickly is relatively low. And they might have another view, another idea. So, be open, I think, would be my recommendation.
Yeah. Great. Well, thanks for sharing, Stefan. And I love the talking to other countries point in there, because I think we're different, different cultures, different systems, but also like very similar challenges, from aging population, or otherwise. So I think, great advice. And I think I now have, on the record that you agreeing with my point from before. So there's no taking that one back now. We have witnesses. So Stefan, we're about halfway through this Flipping the Script episode. Hope you're enjoying it so far.
It's a pleasure.
So now it's time to turn it over to the audience. So we have some questions coming in through the chat. So Stefan, I'll start walking you through some of these.
Perfect.
All right. So our first question comes from Marina Stefan, who asks, DB-type pensions are on the decline all around the world. DC pensions represent another extreme where the decumulation problem is not solved. In general, in your opinion, what is a middle ground structure of pension design that can share the risk more equitably and improve pension coverage in general?
Oh, that's a difficult one. I fully agree.
We have some time.
Yeah. Marina, DB is definitely in decline. If people are in one, they're very lucky. Most of people age 55 and below are not going to be in such a solution. DC only means that your contributions are defined, so you know what you're going to get every month. The big difference between coverage, I think it's not so much that's more, you have to say where can you make an impact. So coverage and contribution levels are pretty much outside most pension organizations' scope. Coverage is either you do it mandatory like in the UK, or it's quasi-mandatory like in Netherlands or Sweden, where basically collective agreements include pensions and almost everyone has it. But that's something outside the scope of most pension providers. Contributions are often set by employers, and also depending on what is offered in the society in general. The scary part with the transition from defined benefit to defined contribution is that the contributions have gone down. So you're paying less into your DC scheme than you would have paid into a DB scheme, while the employer pays in less. So I think that is a challenge. When it comes to the product, you have to think, okay, this is what people have put in. So what's the best you can do with those money? And there, I mean, if you can say, well, you're retiring, here's a pot of money, good luck, and off you go. Or you can say, how should we build a product that can deliver some form of regular income? No one really want to buy an annuity, which is a lifelong nominal income, and that's pretty good idea. If inflation comes around, you realize the nominal income isn't that good. There are in Sweden a model called traditional life, which is not that different from what people also think of as collective DC, which is basically a lifelong income, but it's a variable annuity, so your amount can go up and down. That's probably good if you have a lot of money. If you retire in a relatively small pot, you probably want to think about, how do I want to spend this money over a time period? So do I want to spend all the money the first 10 years and then live out a state pension? Or do I want to spend a little bit more my first 5 years and then have a sort of stepping down and lasting for 15 years before I have to live out a state pension? The reality for many is you don't have enough to buy a meaningful lifelong income. So therefore, I think the scope for innovation is in this sort of middle ground where you have a pot, but it's not going to be enough to get an annuity. And how can you help members there to spread their cash flow in the way that's going to work for them? And remember, everybody is different, right? When you're old, when you're young, everybody's the same. Take a lot of investment risk and you will be fine. When you're a bit older, you have a pot, but you have a lifestyle, you might have other assets, etc., etc. So it's very difficult to do like a one-size-fits-all for a retired person in the same way we did as in the saving phase. And to be a long-winded answer, sorry for that, but think about it. The solution you had for your savings phase when you were saving for your pension is not the solution you're going to need for when you're going to start spending. It's a different problem. One is a saving problem, the other is a spending problem.
Interesting. And I'm, Stefan, going to take the liberty of sitting next to you here and insert my own additional question as a follow-up to that. So you talked about sort of taking an outside-in approach and also like learning from other countries. So I wanted to sort of pick up on both those themes with this question and put you on the spot a little bit and ask, either from a like cross-country comparison perspective, or taking an outside-in lens to, perhaps trying to find a balance in the product being offered where it doesn't currently exist. Is there an outside-in example you can think of that you could share with everyone, or a cross-country perspective of, again, sort of, putting that member first, where it's sort of helped solve that design challenge?
I think we are always solving the problem for those who have a lot of money. So most of the pension solutions, or most financial solutions, are looking for the 15% with most, because those are the most profitable customers. And what I've been working with together with David Bird is to think about how can you deal with this middle ground who don't have enough money so they can get a lifelong income, who doesn't have enough money or interest to go to a financial advisor. How can you help them think about what cash flow profile do you want and how should I invest to get there? What we came up with, and we looked at basically a lot of different countries. Pioneer Pension was an inspiring source, was a lot of good ideas we got from the people we spoke to, was to say people can probably understand or are interested in defining how you want to spend the money, but they should not have to decide then how to invest the money to get there. That's something as a pension provider should be able to do. That's the job of the pension organization, because a lot of people are afraid of investing, and it's a big cost attached to for a member to think about how to invest the money, because first of all you need to sort of learn everything about it. Then what if I've done the wrong thing? So you have regret risks as well. So we start adding that up. People tend to say, I'm not going to do it. Let my provider take care of it. So that should be sort of, when you're thinking about a default solution, should be help them define the cash flow and then take care of the investment for them. But at retirement, people are so different that you cannot say that this cash flow profile will be perfect for you, Gareth, because I don't know so much about you as a pension provider. And I'm not allowed to know so much because, GDPR and other stuff. So I can not really say this is the best thing for you. But if I can give you the tools so you can say, okay, this is going to work for me and I'm going to be satisfied with it, then it's a fine thing. So I'm trying to here sort of, I'm not trying to push our own thinking, but this is why we landed when thinking about this problem, in order to make it accessible to the end user. And we did some testing as well. And I think it's sort of, the response we get is people feel a bit like, wow, this was scary, when they realized that the pension not going to get them as far as they expected. But that's not because of the pension design, it's because you haven't contributed enough. And so if you really need to fix pension, it's almost like a political decision. I mean, in the UK, they took the step of having auto-enrollment, so every employer has to offer pension. That's a big step forward. In Canada, where you work, if you work in the public sector and you're one of the great defined benefit schemes like OMERS, you're perfectly fine. If you're a private sector worker, you probably don't even have a pension or have a very, very small pot. So there is sort of, it's not something we can solve as an industry. It has to be sort of a political decision to take care of it. And to go a bit, because this is a really important one, we do have an aging population in most of our countries, which means if we haven't solved saving for your own pension, you're going to have a lot of people who are going to retire on very little means. And that's going to put a massive strain on all social security, healthcare, also state pensions, and taxes. And how a country going to survive that? So this is a big challenge, big political challenge that's not talked about so much. And that's where I'm getting worried if you're looking like a couple of generations ahead, that it can be quite tough if you don't deal with the aging population. But that's a topic for another talk.
Yeah, like the importance on the, to use the industry jargon, the decumulation phase as well as the accumulation phase.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm looking forward to your next episode on that one. Okay, Stefan, we have, going back to our audience questions, we have another question from Christine, who asks, what do you say to women who pay into their pensions less for childcare reasons, but also because they don't even evenly occupy the top quartile of organizations? Women live longer and have less have less in pensions, yet work just as much throughout their lives in both paid and unpaid roles. What can they do differently, or how can pensions be designed differently?
That's a very contextual question depending on where you live. And in some countries, it's kind of reasonably well taken care of. In Netherlands, for example, if you are married and you have a family, and when you get a divorce, all the pension savings are split 50-50 and shared. So in that case, it doesn't matter if the pension is on the husband or the wife. At the divorce, it's split, or as long as you live together, you're probably going to share it. In Sweden, all pensions are individual, so it belongs to you. The challenge, I would say, the pension system are not built to serve people in this context, because if you're like in the UK or Netherlands, I don't know in other countries, but you have to pay a lot for childcare. It's really, really expensive. It's so expensive that you're probably going to say, probably it's not worth for one of us to work. And the one who stays at home, typically a woman, are then not going to get pension contribution over that period. But for the family, it kind of makes sense, but it put her at risk later on. I think that's largely a political question that needs to be discussed more. How do you make sort of this better? And also tell your partner or husband, if you're in this situation, that, well, I'm going to do this, but then you have to make sure that the pension savings are shared with us, so you also have a part of it. Women tend to live longer, which is really, well, it's not much you can do about its average life expectancy around 2 years, which means we have to think about how to spend the money more carefully. And also, it's not uncommon that there's an age difference between the husband and the wife, which might also be, say, 2 years, and then you have a 4-year difference in expectation. So probably good to think about that if you're going to get a lifelong income, variable annuity, or a CDC, or a traditional life product in Sweden, to make sure that it's going to last as long as either of you are alive. And I think here is a sort of important to think about it. I know when you're like 25, 30, you have more other things to think about than this. But I think in the modern world, with the younger generation today, just say, if we're going to do this, we need to make sure that we both are good going forward. And splitting pension or pension contributions to make sure that you both have a good pension at retirement is what you need to do. I think also when you say like men and women have different career opportunities, I'm not so sure. There's a lot of men also end up having really low paid jobs and being unemployed and so forth. So I think it's too harsh to say this is a man-woman thing. It's more like an individual. You can end up being unlucky in life or very lucky in life. But, if you're unlucky in life, there should be a social security network catching you up. And if you're lucky in life, well, if you have a partner, share properly because you're living together, because you like each other. So yes, you should do that. Yeah.
Stefan, I'm maybe just to follow up on that question, sort of curious again, going back to the outside in, and you've talked a little bit about sort of plan design perspective and sort of the individual's perspective too, both from a female perspective more broadly. Like, are there something, and going back to the communication point, any thoughts on what plans or financial institutions can do to help that? Because there's the big, sort of macro issues, but again, sort of smaller things of whether it's making leaves easier to purchase, or perhaps for those payments for the leaves to be over a longer time, or just even understanding the importance of purchasing a leave now, despite all the other difficult financial considerations, of course. So any thoughts from that perspective?
Well, I think it's very difficult to do a lot of this stuff because it's sort of hardwired into the law or other parts. But one thing, for example, which would be obvious, would be say, I want to split my pension contributions with my partner 50-50 within a scheme. So even if the partner is not working, not connected to the same scheme, you should be able to have a split there. That would be a simple solution. And also when it comes to informing, if you do this, these are the consequences. If you stay home for 5 years to do paternity or maternity leave, what does it mean for my pension? And just sort of, then at least you know what you're getting into. Because today, pension is, people don't talk about it. It's almost like, I don't want to talk about that. And yeah, it's going to be fine. But it's when you're younger, the choices you make is the one that really matters, because the more you contribute when you're 25 and 35, the more you're going to have when you're 65. So sometimes just understanding what's happening if I put 2% in more a year into my pension, what are the consequences? How much more will I get in, expectation, assuming that the projections are roughly reasonable. When you said purchasing leave, could you just explain that for those who are not Canadian?
Okay. So in the Canadian context, when you take a leave, paternity or otherwise, if it's one of what we would call a protected leave by legislation, you have to have an opportunity to purchase that leave. And sort of during that period, it's usually less expensive than trying to buy back that leave, at a later period of time. So, recognizing all the different life events and everything, financial considerations, it can be really hard to get members to pay attention to the option of purchasing that leave when it's more beneficial for them to do so. So how can you make an effort to, communicate, again, something to someone when their attention is somewhere else, focused on other life issues?
Yeah, that's always, how do you get to the member? How can you communicate it? And you probably can do it less boring than we do. So make it a bit more explanatory so they can understand, identify with it. In Sweden, for example, most companies will pay money for your pension. And you also get a pay from the company and the government when you're on a maternity leave or paternity leave. And many companies also top up to 70% of your full salary, and you have it for 1 year and then you're back to work. So that's the sort of decision that was made in order to make it easier for women to stay home with a child for 1 year, not losing out so much in the career or the income during that period. And the same holds for men. You can take it the same leave as well. And what they did was, I think, was clever in Sweden, say that for a couple, you have a certain amount of days you can split between you, but no one is allowed to take more than 3/4. So therefore, if one cannot stay home the full period, but both have to do it. And I think from a social perspective, it's brilliant because both parents get to be home with the children. And from a behavioral perspective, it's a bit like, if you don't take it, you're going to lose it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's quite common now that men in Sweden take part or half of the leave.
So the nudge from the public policy perspective.
Yeah. And also, there's a very good anecdote. There was Sarah McPhee. When she was running SPP, one of the Swedish insurance companies, she told me that if it was a man who got a child, a young man, she basically told him, listen, if you want to make a career in this firm, you have to take the paternity leave. If you don't do that, I'm not going to promote you. So that soft nudge was killing all the sort of, the old stereotypes that sits in the wall. And most young men say, oh, so good, I can do it, because you wanted to do it, but you didn't dare to, So she kind of broke that ice and said, this is what you have to do. So I think a lot of this is also in our heads, right? You have to take it. But with the leave here, design it in a good way so that member actually can benefit from it. I think sometimes the way it's designed in a scheme is a bit old-fashioned because you assume it's a one family income because it was designed in the 60s, etc. So I think if you're a defined benefit scheme, probably the best thing you can do is to say, how can I make this 2024 instead of 1964 in terms of the product and the contract?
Sounds like a good opportunity to think about things from an outside-in perspective.
Yeah.
Okay. Stefan, maybe time for maybe one or two more
Sure.
questions. So Serena has another one. So Stefan, in your opinion, if private pensions are not mandatory for employers to offer, how can the government stimulate employers' pension coverage?
Yeah. They tried in many countries to do this, and it's all ended up with Chile tried, they went mandatory. Australia tried, eventually they went mandatory. UK tried, they did auto enrollment. So my relatively negative outlook is that people are not going to pick up on this. Even if you give tax advantage, tax breaks and all of that, people are not utilizing it. They will, only the one high income earners with a financial advisor will use it for tax planning. But if you really want people to increase coverage, since the employers are quite reluctant, I think you need to do something auto enrollment, or like in Australia, mandatory savings.
And maybe, Stefan, we're here in the Netherlands, and I'm sure this could be another episode in and of itself, but I would be remiss if I didn't ask you for some brief thoughts on currently what's happening in the Netherlands from a pension reform perspective, and perhaps how that may or may not be taken into account some of the topics we talked about today.
The Dutch pension discussion is very local in terms of it's only Netherlands for having these discussions. Netherlands are have been moving for a long time from a defined benefit solution, not that different from the public pension schemes in Canada, into a DC space. And over the years, since the financial crisis back in sort of the IT bubble back in year 2000, they are constantly taking away benefits and put more and more risk on the members. So today, even before the pension reform, all the risk are on basic with the members, very little with employers. So they have basically moved into a DC system. And the pension reform now, as I see it, this is a bit provocative, by the way, is basically they are just adjusting the law to the economical reality. So if you ask a Dutch person, technically we still have a DB, but the benefits aren't defined. So that's kind of a weird thing. How can that be? Well, because legally you still treat it as a defined benefit when it's set contributions and so forth. So now it's going back to say we have a collective system, which is basically DC, and in the law we're going to treat this as a collective system, which is DC. So it's a small reform in real life in terms of sort of it's adapting to reality. It's going to be a massive effort for the Dutch pension funds to transform the accounting system, all that kind of back-end stuff to this new one. I personally see it as a good step forward because it's going to take complexity out of the system without really changing it too much. So they're not going to go completely to an individual DC system, but you're going to have what they call a collective DC system where your pension can go up and down depending on how the markets have developed. But you have a sort of, you're trying to achieve a certain goal, but if the finance is not there, well, we're going to either reduce your pension, or if the finance is there, we're going to increase your pension. So it's going to be a more straight link with how your investments have behaved than before. But it was already there. So I'm quite positive to this new reform.
Okay. Well, and I, once it's fully implemented, look forward to the Pioneer Intentions episode that sort of shares some more of that experience with us.
And that you have to wait for a while because Dutch pension reforms takes forever, and they have a 5-year implementation plan, and there's constant discussions. So yes, it can be a serious.
Well, we are used to taking a long-term view. So, so Stefan, thank you so much. You've answered my questions. You've answered some questions from those watching online. Now it's your turn to get to ask a question. So not of me, but of your next guest, who's Rob Bauer, who's a leader in the ESG and investment space.
Yeah.
And so, Stefan, what question would you like to pose to Rob?
Yeah. So, Rob, my question to you is, a long time ago, you were one of the pioneers in introducing ESG into portfolios, and you did that at ABP. Meanwhile, after that, you have looked a lot into sustainability. You've done a lot of research. You have a critical mind and an inquisitive mind, which is really great. So my question to you, where are we going to go from here with sustainability? So that was a relatively short question, but I thought it's good to narrow it down.
I look forward to seeing Rob's answer. So to close, Stefan, thank you very much for the opportunity to sit here beside you today and put you on the hot seat. Thanks for answering all of the questions. And thank you to everyone online for joining us today. Have a great rest of the day.